Hello, my bug people, my plant people, bird people, bat people. Did I miss anyone? Spiders? My spider people, how could I forget? Hello. My name is Jaqueline Buenrostro. I am with the Xerces Society for Invertebrate Conservation. I am on the pesticide reduction team, and I work on pesticide reduction policy here in Colorado, but also around the country, which is why the work that I'm going to be talking about today did not take place in Colorado. It took place in Albuquerque, New Mexico, and Sacramento, California. My colleague Kevin teed it up really well for me. He kind of teased the study I'm going to be talking about. But even though it didn't take place in Colorado, I think it should spur some really interesting conversations and hopefully some good action here in Colorado. And really the moral of the story of the work that I'm going to be sharing in the next few minutes is that it doesn't matter how much climate resilient pollinator habitat we protect and install and maintain in the landscape. If we are not protecting that habitat from pesticide pollution, we are not going to move the needle for pollinator conservation the way that we need to move the needle. So, with that absolute rain cloud of an introduction. So, okay, Kevin talked about this a little bit. I think it bears repeating. We are seeing declines of our butterflies and moths here in the US, and this was a really good year for getting data published on this. We have a few authors of this amazing publication here at the Pollinator Summit, so thank you to those people for joining us. This is amazing. So over the 20-year period from 2000 to 2020, butterfly abundance across the US declined by 22% on average. So we are losing butterflies and moths. And Kevin also kind of hit on the big three here of why we are losing butterflies. We, of course, have climate change, we have habitat loss, and we have pesticides. Pesticides can kind of be the elephant in the room. We all love to plant pollinator gardens, right? That's the fun part of pollinator conservation, but we like our lawns, right? Maybe not people in this room. I'm preaching to the choir. But pesticides can be really hard to talk about with people. They can be really divisive, but they're so, so important. And so when I talk about pesticides, I'm talking about the whole umbrella here. So insecticides, herbicides, fungicides, maybe some adjuvants in there, some miticides, some other ones too. Chemical pesticides are a major driver of butterfly declines. I have this, excellent. So I want to transition to talking about urban spaces for butterfly, but also pollinator conservation more generally. We know that urbanization is really it's one of the driving factors of habitat loss, right? We're converting our natural spaces that used to support butterflies and other pollinators into our urban spaces, but if we manage them a little bit better with pollinator habitat, our towns and cities can be an absolute oasis for butterflies and other pollinators. And so we're starting to look at these urban areas as a big opportunity for butterfly conservation. And there has been some work to look at this question of, is habitat safe for butterflies in other areas of conservation interest and concern? So agricultural margins, nursery plants, Kevin talked a little bit about that research here, but our urban areas are still a little bit data deficient, right? We don't know a lot about this question in our urban spaces. I'm sure many of you might have sort of sad anecdotal stories to tell about how you've watched butterflies decline in your urban gardens, but we didn't have a lot of data on this. And so there was this study that Xerces staff recently did with our amazing partners in Matt Forster's lab at the University of Nevada, Reno, shout out to them. And this question looked at, is our urban habitat safe for butterflies in terms of pesticide pollution? And so what we did at an absolute 10-mile high level, if you want more details, I do encourage you to look into the publication. It's now out there. But what we did is we sampled 336 butterfly host plants, so the plants that are used by those caterpillars, in urban parks that are managed by city staff and private residential gardens in both Albuquerque, New Mexico, and Sacramento, California. We took those leaves, we sent them off to the lab, and we had them tested using LCMS for 94 different pesticides, including insecticides, fungicides, herbicides, adjuvants, some degradation products of those pesticides as well. And so, doom and gloom warning here. 93% of those host plants were contaminated with pesticides. So across Albuquerque and Sacramento, only 7% of those plants did not have any pesticide residues at all. Contamination was pretty ubiquitous. We detected 47 different pesticide compounds. And let me get out of the way so you can see. Each contaminated plant had a median of 3 and up to 18 pesticides per contaminated plant. So there's one plant that had 18 different compounds on it. Really reinforcing the point that our wildlife, our butterflies, our other pollinators are exposed to multiple chemicals at a time. So there's a lot of pesticide names on this slide. But this is what we found. These are the most prevalent compounds in Sacramento and Albuquerque. And our cutoff for prevalent here is different. In Sacramento, there were many more compounds that were found the majority of the time. So our cutoff for prevalent here is 50%. In Albuquerque, it was 20%. There's just fewer compounds we found the majority of the time there. What we found in Sacramento, obviously many more than this, but the most prevalent were azoxystrobin, which is a fungicide on 84% of those plants, methoxyfenazide, which is an insect growth regulator insecticide on 78% of those plants, fluopyram on 63% of those plants. And in Albuquerque, atrazine was the most prevalent there on 70% of plants, followed by prometon, azoxystrobin, and diuron. Feel free to take a picture of this if you want to. Okay, so what does this mean as far as risks to butterflies? And this is where I want to talk a little bit deeper about what Kevin sort of alluded to with our EPA process for regulating pesticides. So when the EPA goes to do their risk assessment and their registration of a pesticide, what insect do they do tests on? Anyone know? Insect, the European honeybee. That is their proxy species for all terrestrial invertebrates. But we know that our butterflies don't react the same way as our honeybees. And so we're using this process. Well, how do honeybees react? And the same doesn't apply to butterflies. In the majority of cases, if we know anything about how butterflies react to pesticides, it's independent academic studies that are done after a pesticide is already brought to market. And so I just want to say that we have relatively little information about actual tox data of how these pesticides are affecting butterflies. But I will highlight what we do know for a few of the pesticides that we found. So azoxystrobin, that's that fungicide. The residues were enough to reduce monarch butterfly wing size in 28% of the plants where we found it in Sacramento. This isn't a lethal effect, right? It's not killing the butterflies outright. But for a migratory species like the monarch butterfly, if you're having smaller wings, that's going to have really important impacts for your ability to migrate, reproduce, and maintain your population. The other one I want to highlight here that Kevin also hinted at is chlorantraniliprole. This is an insecticide. It is a systemic. I'm starting to see folks move away from the neonicotinoids and towards chlorantraniliprole. This product was marketed as being much more pollinator friendly than the neonics. And while it is much less toxic to honeybees than the neonics, it's actually several orders of magnitude more toxic to the monarch butterfly than the neonics are. Sorry. So everywhere we found chlorantraniliprole, the residues were enough to kill 10% of a monarch caterpillar population, known as the LC10. And then in 5 of those cases, it surpassed the LC50, or enough to kill 50% of the population. Atrazine, we don't have tox data for atrazine, but there was a recent EPA report that came out that found that atrazine harmed a third of land invertebrates that are protected under the Endangered Species Act. We all know that includes butterflies, bees, and the like. Another thing that I want to touch on that we were able to look into in California and Sacramento, but not in New Mexico, is whether those residues could have come from agriculture. We know that pesticides don't necessarily stay where they're applied and they might drift. So were those residues from an agricultural source? And this is because California has arguably the most robust pesticide use reporting system in the country, where growers are actually required to report the pesticides that they use. And so what we found, based on comparing those data records to what we found, is that 2 pesticides were very likely from agricultural sources. The first, methoxyfenazide, again, that insect growth regulator insecticide found on 78% of plants, its only reported use was agricultural in Sacramento. And then the next one is thiobencarb. That one is an herbicide, and its only registered label application is for rice in California. So I don't think we were applying that in the urban areas of Sacramento. That one probably drifted from agriculture as well. So a quick note as I wrap up here on, we have this information, but that's still an underestimate of the risk rate, and there's a few reasons why. So this study told us where pesticides were found, but not where they were applied, right? It could have been agriculture, it could have been your next door neighbor, right? Because pesticides don't stay where they were applied. We know that most plants had multiple pesticides. As we saw, the median of contaminated plants had 3 different compounds. But we don't know exactly how this translates to risk, because again, the EPA, they evaluate pesticides on a chemical by chemical basis. They are assuming, one chemical exposure at a time. Whereas we know, based on this study and, a bunch of other studies out there, now we have an accumulation of evidence that wildlife are exposed to multiple different pesticides at a time, but we just don't evaluate that risk in our federal pesticide process. We know how many pesticides were detected, but if we have any chem nerds in the audience, you probably know LCMS. We couldn't capture glyphosate or pyrethroids. Glyphosate is an herbicide. Pyrethroids are a class of insecticides. They're very commonly applied in urban areas, but the results that I showed just don't include them because we couldn't detect them. And then finally, I already touched on this. We know the levels of pesticides that harm butterflies for only a select few pesticides that we found, but not for the majority of pesticides on the market, and not the majority of butterfly species that we have. Okay, and so quickly, this just highlights there is really a need here when we're thinking about butterfly conservation and pollinator conservation more broadly to address the pesticide elephant in the room. We need to be talking about pesticide use and addressing it on publicly managed lands, private residential uses, and agricultural and grazing lands. Okay, a little bit of bright side here. Cities and towns, they are already playing their part in being a solution to this. The Xerces Society, we're really proud to administer the Bee City and Bee Campus USA program. There are 5 affiliates of that program here in Colorado. Those communities make commitments to install and maintain pollinator habitat, protect that habitat from pesticides, and spread the word to their community to do the same. And those affiliates are making commitments to implement an integrated pest management plan that reduces use of pesticides, designate pesticide-free spaces, limit their cosmetic use of pesticides. And if we have any municipal folks in the room from cities and counties, part of my job with the Xerces Society is to help you reduce pesticide use in your community. So please find me if you're interested in doing that. I would love to help you do that in your community. And of course, we do need to continue expanding habitat. I would be remiss if I didn't mention this point. The authors of this study did note that they weren't finding host plants as much as they had hoped to. There's still a lot of work to be done to continue that gardening fight of installing native habitat. Okay, thanks to our supporters. We're probably over on time, but thanks for having me. And if we have time for questions, I'd love to take them, or come find me.
Thanks so much. Maybe time for one question as I pull up the next speaker slides. Any one question real quick? Just shout it out.
Yeah, since we know that conventional ag is a key driver in pollinator habitat loss, then why isn't more research being done on all of these chemicals to be more precise in what is causing what?
That's such a great and complex question. There's a lot of just systemic inertia, I think. This is the way that the EPA does their risk evaluation process and registers these pesticides. It's gotten worse just in the past few months. So what I do, continuing to fight at the state level, that's where I'm seeing a lot of progress right now. Instead of like spinning our wheels at the federal level right now, reach out to your local community, reach out to your state leaders to do something, because there's a lot that states can do, right? So the EPA, FIFRA, how we regulate pesticides in the US, they set the floor for doing that. And so we can do a lot at the state level to reach out to our leaders and say, hey, that's the floor. We should be doing a lot more than that. So I know that's not like a firm answer, but thanks for the question.
Thanks so much. How about another round of applause?